All right, guys, he joins us every single Tuesday to talk all things Gamecocks football. Our good friend JC Shurburtt of Inside the Gamecocks of the Big Spur. He joins the show once again. JC, what's going on, my friend? I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Yeah, great to be with you, Chris. Excruciating loss. Another one to the Gators, by the way. There's been a long line of those. I think Will Muschamp had a couple there in 2018 and 19 against these guys, but just a tough one to swallow. I thought they had it. Up 10 late like that, all the momentum in the world. You'd held them to what, 3 points second half to that point, and then just two inexcusable drives based on a lot of different things. Matchups were bad. The tackling on the perimeter by Marcellus Dial was, he picked a bad day to have his worst game of the year. I don't think people have noticed him so much this season because teams haven't really challenged him and thrown at him. He's really done a good job. So it's unfortunate because, Marcellus has kind of been inconsistent prior to this year. And it just kind of puts a bad taste in people's mouth that he kind of shows up and boom, that was a bad blown tackle. And that's not him. That's not his standard. You feel bad for him, but you just can't have that in that situation. And then you just absolutely cannot have Pearsall matched up against your safeties, which, the troubling trend, Chris, with when you look at all six games this year so far, opposing offensive coordinators, and I've said this all week, it gets into the other team has coaches too category. They are finding matchups and exploiting them against this defense. I saw it against North Carolina. I'm sitting there. Drake May drops back. Tight end runs a deep cross against Stone Blanton. We saw what Kobe Paysor did in one-on-one coverage with Keenan Nelson a couple of times. Furman had the slant all night until they adjusted. Georgia, I don't know what Mike Bobo was doing first half. Second half, though, he just adjusted his running game one gap over, and then he gashed Carolina and then took advantage of some things downfield, so they adjusted as well. You go forward after Georgia to Mississippi State, and these the home games have been just bizarre. They held Mississippi State 32 yards rushing. Well, Will Rogers, not running Mike Leach's offense, throws for 487 because they take advantage of Tulu Griffith on DQ Smith all night. Tennessee attacked the perimeter and the run game like there was no tomorrow, and really had her number defensively, running the ball. And then we go right back to the same Mississippi State type of performance against Florida, but this time it cost them because you were able to hold them to 71 rushing yards. I know 30 of it came on that safety or whatever at the end. But still, man, South Carolina held Florida's run game in check. If you'd have told me the Gamecocks would have outrushed the Gators, I'd have said Carolina's winning by at least 2 or 3 scores, and they should have. But then they go and blow it like that, and it's another record game for a quarterback that you're not really expecting to come in and light you up like that against a receiving core that's got one or two good players and a tight end. And it just adds up to a disappointing defeat. Shane Beamer is now 3-10 against SEC East competition outside of Vanderbilt. I didn't even realize that till I looked it up. But yeah, that's tough. And they're going to play a team that he's 0-2 against this weekend in Missouri. So just a tough pill to swallow and an absolute must-have game. To blow it like that, just it's crushing. Is it the end of the program based on track record around here under Beamer? Probably not. He has a way of rallying the troops when things seem at their darkest. But that defensive performance Saturday, Chris, was after an open date where people allegedly were supposed to be making adjustments and figuring things out. I just I get more and more concerned about the defense moving forward. And it wasn't, I do want to say this. You can't not blame coaching for Saturday because, like I said, other coordinators are getting their teams into favorable matchups, and nothing's happening to kind of fix that, right? But there were also some player issues, like Dial makes a tackle, the game's over. There were some player mistakes. But does that lead back to coaching fundamentals? I don't know. So I don't want to absolve anybody on that side of the ball for what happened Saturday. I don't even know. I don't even think it's an either or. I think it's an all of the above. But they have to fix this quick because you're going on the road where your offense is kind of scoring at like half of what they are at home. It's one tough environment and one environment you hadn't won in a while. You got 4 home games to close out the season that are all winnable. And so if you can steal one of these, I think you're still in good shape to get to a bowl and all that. But boy, oh boy, it's they've put themselves in a hole. And the frustrating part is it's one side of the ball that just hasn't gotten fixed all year for whatever reason.
And JC, you mentioned that, we were just talking off air about that was, I guess, the most demoralized you had felt after a game since 2017 Kentucky. I mentioned the vibe of that game was like 2014 Tennessee. I'll never forget leaving the stadium that night and how dejected I felt. And then I think back too, to like you mentioned, the series against Florida. For some reason, there's just been these excruciating losses, whether it's been via blowout like last year or like my mind goes directly, JC, to 2018, right? Who can forget in the swamp when you're up by, I think, 17 or 14 points and you end up losing that game? That was the Felipe Franks shushing his own crowd game or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been some really excruciating ones, but to your point, I want to make sure people realize, like, I don't think you're overstating it or overselling it in the sense of, that was a detrimental loss. I mean, we talked about, I labeled it the most important game of the 2023 season over the summer because of what hinged on it in regards to it's one thing to not win 8 games in year 3 and match the win total, and that's disappointing. But now you have to stare in the face the real reality that this team may not make a bowl game. I mean, it's going to take a significant turnaround to get to 6 wins. And I think that's a reality that is really tough to stomach. JC, you mentioned, obviously, the defensive side. Let's get right into it. I'm not sitting here, JC, asking you to call for jobs here on the show, but I think most of this fan base at minimum feels like Shane Beamer has to take a good, long, hard look at Clayton White and what is happening on the defensive side. I feel the same way, JC. It's just, the defense, you hate to say it's been smoke and mirrors the first 2 years because I think that's taken away too much from what they've done. But we had the question, JC, if the turnovers aren't there, right? If it's not turnover aided and things happening, can they still be a good defense? And the answer this year has been a resounding no. And what's most shocking to me, JC, is, we felt like if the rushing defense improved, this defense was going to take steps forward, undoubtedly. The rushing defense has improved, but JC, I don't know whether it's because South Carolina is that much better at stopping the runner. Like you mentioned, teams have just realized there's explosive plays to be had down the field. Why would you run the football? So you mentioned your concern level. Obviously, I definitely think it's personnel as well. Way too many missed tackles, way too much sloppy play. Everything I just said, where do you sit in regards to when it comes to defense? I think at minimum, like I said, you're on the side of Shane Beamer's going to have some really tough decisions to make. No matter how the rest of this season goes, he's going to have some tough decisions to make at season's end.
Yeah, I'll say this, a couple thoughts. First of all, on the turnovers, you can't always count on those, no matter how much you emphasize it, no matter how much you pride yourself on forcing turnovers. It's that old adage: the way the ball bounces. Sometimes the way the ball doesn't bounce your way. Also, if you're a team that is known for causing turnovers, what's going to happen? Again, it gets back to the other team as coaches too. What are they going to emphasize all week in practice? Ball security, ball security, ball security. Wrap up the ball. Don't let it out of your hands. Don't play sloppy. These guys can force them. They're going to try to punch it out, that kind of thing. Blah, 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 blah. And so teams come into it against your defense with the mindset of we're not going to turn it over. We're not going to turn it over. Keep in mind, these are all college kids. So sometimes you have to overemphasize things. In the pros, not to turn the ball over. You're going to get fired if you do. And like in college, sometimes it takes that little extra emphasis because these are college kids. Their attention spans are, wherever. So I think some of that's happening. I think when teams prepare for South Carolina, well, how do we prepare? Well, we got to emphasize we don't turn the ball over. We've got to be good on special teams. Okay, well, let's go. And like I said, they have coaches too. So that's you can't count on turnovers ever. We should have learned that 2017, 2018, Chris. I mean, that 2017 team, that won 9 games under Will Muschamp. Man, they were top 10 in the country in turnovers. I think Dante Sawyer led the country in fumble recoveries or forced fumbles,
You
something
may
like that.
recall, JC, they got 5 in that Michigan game to turn that game.
5.
The Gamecocks were dead in that game, and then Michigan, it almost felt like handed South Carolina the football game.
I mean, that was the trademark of that team. They were, guys like Sky Moore were ball hawks, and you had the ability. The D line that year I thought was pretty disrupted. Lance Thompson did a good job getting them to get the ball off people and stuff. But the next year, even before they lost all those players to injury in 2018, they weren't getting the turnovers. It just didn't happen. Teams emphasized it. You were missing some guys that were kind of good, like Sky, to get it off and all that. So, there's a lesson right there. And like I said, that was before that defense got completely cratered due to injuries. That's number one. Number two, defensive coordinators. I have seen through the years, and I kind of just started thinking about this. There are a lot of very good defensive coordinators that end up getting figured out, and quite frankly, they have trouble regaining it. I go back to Brian Van Gorder. Brian Van Gorder at Georgia, one of the best coordinators in the country, right? Had a cup of coffee here for 30 days, went to the pros, came back to Auburn where they were atrocious. Ends up at Notre Dame, has a couple of good years, then gets exposed again, and that's it. Alex Grinch, who everybody in Southern California wants to fire, when he was with the Pirate out at Washington State, heck, that was one of the best defensive coordinators Mike Leach ever had. I remember them winning games like 30-10 over Oregon because that defense was so good. Well, he gets to Oklahoma and Southern California. Now, teams kind of figured it out, right? Tyrone Nix here, when he took over for John Thompson in 2005, he got that defense so much better. I mean, they weren't winning games 40-30. They weren't 16-15, 14-10, 13-9, those types of games because he was that good. Well, then what happened by the time 2007 rolled around? Steamroll City, baby. That happened to him here. It's happened to Reggie Herring and Vic Koenig at Clemson and Kevin Steele, through his career. So there are, I want to say this, there are good defensive coordinators who get figured out and they end up flaming out or whatever. The great ones always adjust, always stay 2 steps ahead, always are evolving, creating, whatever. And they don't, and sometimes they'll hit a bad spot like this. I mean, there's 6 games left. Clayton White, I don't know that we know yet, because if he adjusts and has a massive turnaround, then we're all just sitting there saying, well, at least he got it together the last 6 games. But right now, it is clear when you watch this team, and I'm not even smart enough to know how to fix it. Like, what would it do? Do you put a safety in the box? All that X's and O's stuff. I don't know. I just know this. It's obvious to everybody. Opposing OCs are looking and going, okay, we're going to get this matchup. They get the matchup, they execute, and it's working. So there's good calls versus bad calls all over the place. Shane Beamer's right. There were some good calls that weren't executed Saturday, but that's part of it too. And sometimes those mistakes magnify, when you're not consistently, when other teams are consistently knowing how to pick on you. That's more magnified than maybe it should be. So, they got to go back to the drawing board and do something, whether that's personnel, whether it's playing different guys in the secondary. I know K'Wan Banks has looked pretty good when he's been out there covering wise. He's a lot smaller than those other dudes, but he packs a punch, and I doubt he misses that tackle on the perimeter. Other than that, what direction do you go? I mean, edge is still an issue too. They got more pressure Saturday than they have, but you've got things happening up front that, especially on the edges, that they could be better. But, all in all, man, it's just the simple fact that coaches are coming in, playing South Carolina, looking at them, and they're figuring out what to do and doing it. If it wasn't that Chris, then you wouldn't have seen Mississippi State go downtown like they did. And you would have seen Florida all of a sudden, look like the 96 Gators going up and down the field in the passing game, because that's not what they do. They're specifically coming in and going, hey, this is open. This is the matchup we can definitely get. They're not adjusting. Let's exploit it. Because otherwise they'd have just sat there and tried to run the ball and not know. but good coaches figure things out. There's a lot of good coaches in this league, and we'll see what Clayton White. Sometimes you got to have an answer, and we'll see what his answer is starting Saturday.
And JC, unfortunately, it's another wasted outing by the offense. A fantastic outing by so many guys on the offensive side of the football, led, of course, by your quarterback. Spencer Rattler did everything he could, put on his Superman cape, and did all he could to keep the Gamecocks in the football game and win that football game. Went 23 of 30, 313 yards, 4 touchdowns, an interception. He was only sacked twice, but, I mean, a lot of times evaded pressure, right? That number could have been much higher. He used his legs yet again, 7 carries for 46 yards on the day, 6.6 per carry. Mario Anderson was fantastic. We can at least say the Gamecocks have most definitely found their RB1 in Anderson, 20 for 98, along a 4.9 yards per carry. And he worked in the passing game, 2 for 23, had that touchdown catch. Trey Knox continues to be a main target, 8 catches on the day. Xavier Legette had a great day, over 100 yards receiving. A lot of positives and a lot of bright spots, JC, on the offensive side. And again, the only shame of it is that it went for naught in a losing effort. Your thoughts on the offensive side? Because again, there's 2 sides to every coin. And I would say if you're looking for positives as a Gamecock fan, the good news is this: you've got a quarterback and a running back now leading an offensive attack. And what they did, by the way, let me say, JC, on the offensive line. I know you've talked about this. Nick Gargiulo at center, Trey Jones at right guard, Vershawn Lee at the right tackle spot, and obviously some other guys slid in and out of there, but I thought that was a pretty solid combination. I know Florida's not the best defensive line you've played, but I think the offensive line, you're seeing the progression, you're seeing the improvement from week to week to week. Again, it's unfortunate. It's in a losing effort, but there are a lot of positives to draw from the offense, and I think that's the thing you hang your hat on right now, is saying, hey, if we do go 4-2 in the last 6 and get to bowl eligibility, we've got an offense that at least is going to give us a chance to do that.
Absolutely. And I'll say this. I mean, the key for the offense now is you ever heard another old adage, take this show on the road? They got to take this show on the road. Now, look, North Carolina, I think we're all figuring out, is a pretty good football team. I mean, a really good football team. And even in that game, Chris, South Carolina's inside the 23 times late in the game. They could have scored all 3 times. 9 sacks. First, chalk that up to whatever. Neyland Stadium and Sanford Stadium are ridiculously difficult places to play, and especially score points, especially in Neyland these days, because they're playing really good defense up there. But starting with Missouri, the offense right now, away from Williams-Brice, they're about half as productive. Scoring, yardage, whatever, mistakes, that kind of thing. So they need to take that up a notch if they're going to win one of these next 2 on the road. I did like what they did. Vershawn Lee, the tackle's kind of been on the table since August. Somebody mentioned that to me back in August. And I think he's been awfully good at center this year. He's very athletic. He's one of the most athletic linemen they have. And people forget, in the 2020 opener, Vershawn Lee played about 6 snaps out there at right tackle as a true freshman against Tennessee that night. So he's got experience. Moving Nick to center was it's seamless. And then Trey Jones, he's another really good athlete. I guess he's been the backup center, and they finally moved him over to guard. And I thought he held his own too. Now, when Vershawn got hurt, I do want to say this: Sidney Fugar probably had his best game. Was he perfect? No, not by any stretch. But he actually, that wasn't like the end of the story. When Vershawn went out, Sidney actually went in there and held his own. So he's at least getting somewhat better. But I'll say this, I think Josh Simon, I've been kind of hoping he gets more touches, and that's not a huge complaint. I just think he brings a little, you notice these kids that are from the state that were at the lower level that come back, like Simon from Western Kentucky and Mario Anderson from Newberry. They play like every play is their last. And I think that gets everybody charged up. And I've got a deep appreciation for how they play the game. And so I think they're in good shape there. Getting Juice Wells back would be even better. I mean, if you start talking about the grand scheme of the offense, but that's the key for them. Take the show on the road, have a explosive outing in somebody else's stadium, because right now it's probably a function of schedule. I think that they haven't necessarily been as productive away from Williams Brice as they can. But like I said, the opener was one thing. Neyland and Sanford are two other different animals. That this isn't what they're not going into one of those types of environments on Saturday, although they are playing a really good football team.
JC, I think, too, we should give credit to Dowell Loggins. I thought the play calling, I thought the design was great. I thought the way, we've all been clamoring for, we want Juju McDowell, for example, utilized, but in a certain way. I thought the way they utilized him was beautiful. Like you mentioned, getting Joshua Simon involved, 1 catch, 1 touchdown. And what do you know? Old Nicholas Harbor got himself a catch down the field. Even game, got to check that off their list. So, I thought all in all, you can you can nitpick all you want, I assume, and we'll see, right? It's only 6 games into his first year, but halfway through, JC, I got no complaints. I mean, really, from the play calling perspective, I thought that was a beautifully called game on Saturday.
And the thing I like about him is, man, he's, I talked about always evolving. You kind of listen to his press conferences and you can pick up on what he says. And you have to do this in the NFL. See, there's good traits and bad traits when you're coaching college. You can get from the NFL, and the previous guy, that was here 1 year in the NFL 1 year, obviously brought a whole lot of things that you probably don't belong in college with him. But the other thing about the NFL is you're constantly retinkering. What can we do better? Because opposing defensive coordinators in the NFL will catch up to you in a heartbeat, and you're all dealing with great players, right? Every week, that's the best players in the world. And so that approach, I think, has actually helped him here because he's constantly like, oh, we'll do this. The Juju thing I thought that's perfect. I mean, Juju McDowell, 2 touches, 2 touchdowns. Josh Simon, 1 touch, 1 touchdown. Getting those guys the ball is great. That makes Juju happy, I think, because he is a playmaker. He doesn't have to run it into a brick wall. I thought some of the run calls were real nice, well blocked, well designed. Mario Anderson in the passing game, certainly that was a pleasant surprise. Not that he's dropped it or anything this year. And then, with Nick Harbor, what's funny, Chris, is everybody always talks, the criticism, I guess, as a recruit with him was his hands. Well, the 2 passes he's caught this year, the touchdown was a good thrown ball by Lenorse, but that's a tough catch to make over there, especially when it's your first, you're in college and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, I'm about to catch a touchdown. A lot of guys will drop that. And then Saturday, I don't know if you noticed, but he's like holding on to the ball like it was, it was poking out, it was almost dropped it, but he just took his big arm and squeezed it and, got out like that. I thought, hey, that's pretty awesome. He's getting there. He's getting there. People have to be patient, but he's getting there. So, just a lot of positives on offense. It's hard to talk about it because it was such a tough game. I bet Spencer wishes he'd had the throwback. And I'll mention one more thing that was potentially a bigger deal than people thought was the missed extra point. So you make that extra point, right? And I don't know why that happens. It's happened at home. You make that extra point. Florida most likely is going for 2 on that first touchdown because to cut it to 3 instead of 5. They may or may not make it. Well, let's say they don't make it. Well, then the next time they're going for 2 again, and the worst you are is down 3. So instead of trying to get to the end zone in 47 seconds, you're trying to get to the 30 where Mitch Jeter can potentially kick the tying field goal or the game-winning field goal. And I think when you're down more than 3, it does change your approach a lot to the game. Of course, if you're Billy Napier, you just kind of went for it all and won down 3. But that was a big. I mean, now maybe Florida would have gotten the 2 and then gone back and scored anyway. It's still a 4-point game, but boy, you'd kind of wish you had that one back because it not only would have changed your approach, probably Florida's too, and it could have led to a different outcome in a game like that. The least little thing can lead to a different outcome.
It's those little things, JC, that add up that can win or lose you a ball game. Certainly, you mentioned that botched extra point, and that's one of them that you look back on. JC, before we move into this Missouri game, obviously the second half of this 2023 season will begin for South Carolina. As you look back on the first half, you can give a grade if you want. Obviously, we'll do like a mid-season report card type of deal. But, when you look back on the first half of this Gamecocks football season, there's some good, There's some bad, there's some ugly. What is your biggest takeaway, and what has surprised you the most, I would say, from the first 6 games?
I'm going to go with like an old school kindergarten, first grade progress report style grade. Needs improvement. How about that? It's overall it needs improvement. I mean, I know these guys are behind the 8 ball on the offensive line with 8, 9 injuries. You can't do anything about that. And bless their hearts, those guys are trying. Lonnie Teasley and Greg Atkins and Dowell Loggins, whoever else is. I mean, dude, they're doing everything they can. The Vershawn Lee move until somebody comes back and is healthy is probably the last card to be played, to be honest, because it's not. There's nothing else there. There's nothing else to be done there to kind of tinker it. But man, credit them for going out and making the move and saying, all right, we got to fix right tackle. How can we fix right tackle and not weaken other spots? Well, you could move Trey into the lineup, and Trey's a veteran and a good player, and slide Vershawn out. And, like I said, that's kind of been on the table for a little bit. I think it's more of in case of emergency break glass kind of thing. And then you got to hope maybe the positive things, if Vershawn's hurt, maybe some positive things you saw from Fugar, he gets a little more confidence, plays better, whatever. So that's an issue. There's not much you could do about that. Running back, yeah, it's kind of hard to think that maybe you shouldn't have started Mario Anderson from the beginning. And I don't know, obviously a lot's determined by practice. Maybe he wasn't practicing like that, but I mean, that guy, he runs like every carry is his last. Again, I have a deep appreciation for how guys play the game like that. He's hard to tackle. He's got good balance, vision, and he's faster than people think. I mean, and I think it was just a matter of getting him comfortable at this level. Well, I think you have to reckon, in hindsight, I'm not trying to be an armchair quarterback here, Monday morning quarterback or whatever, but I think it's important to recognize that with certain players and say, okay, this guy's not going to get to where we want him to get without playing in a game, because he's coming up a level. He's got to adjust, throw him out there, let him roll. He got no carries against North Carolina. Maybe that could have helped at the very least if he's getting 6-7 yards a carry or something like that. I'm not saying he would have. Maybe he wasn't ready. They're not sending the house. They're gonna have to back off, respect the run, do whatever. So with that, I'm glad they finally found him. I'm glad he's, the RB1 now, and I think that's an answer. And we'll see if DJ Braswell that maybe get in there now. And so offense overall, while it was a concern, and those guys have gotten better. The defense has not. I mean, it's one thing after another on that side of the ball, and you look at the personnel and you say, well, gosh, I mean, they did lose some guys, but they replaced them with pretty good players. And then a lot of these guys were pretty highly touted recruits. I mean, I went through the secondary earlier. That Beamer mentioned it this week. They're not young back there. Their depth is. And the crazy thing is the one freshman that's back there playing is playing better than anybody in Kilgore. He's playing like a grizzled veteran back there. I don't know that Jordan Strawn is himself. I don't know if he's going to get back there. Somebody's got to step up at edge besides Brian Thomas Jr. He's a guy that's good in spots. But they got to get Gear going, or Tuizama or Elijah Davis. Pick your guy. I do think the interior of the D line has gotten better and better when TJ Sanders is out there. They're not really getting gashed like they were. And the linebackers, in coverage, they're going to be an issue. But I think against the run, they're playing well right now. I mean, do they have some missed assignments? Sometimes, yes. Those guys also are playing a ton of snaps. It's been, Pup and Bam Martin Scott have gotten in there more recently, but they're playing Stone and Debo are playing a lot of snaps. So, overall though, there's just no planet where you say, well, defense has gotten a lot better. It just hasn't. It's been really, in some ways, a repeat of last year with the consistent not adjusting until halftime kind of deal. And I don't know if they try to adjust or not. Maybe they are, and it's just not sticking until halftime. I have no idea. but it just seems the defense usually gets a little better in the second half, not always. But then Saturday, man, just inexcusable all the way around, and you worry, that's just kind of going to be the way it is. And then throw in the, the special teams. I think that when you're having to play a lot of snaps with some of your guys, like at linebacker, Chris, and Beamer's moved to this, it does impact your special teams because they can't go out there on every unit. And last year, guys like Debo and Stone were out there on every unit, and you had, DQ Smith, guys like that. Well, you can't do that now. And so your depth or lack of depth or lack of experience depth or quality depth, that shines through. And that's probably why you're not blocking punts and maybe missing extra points or something like that. But and then Kai Kruger, I think, has been inconsistent. I think it's the best way to describe him. He's capable. He just needs to be more consistent. Mitch Jeter's been great, obviously. The fake they dialed up, the one fake's been fine. I mean, it's just, you look at the special teams and they're not making an impact. But it's another one of those things, just like turnovers. I don't think you can always count on that, because again, during the week, other coaches, they have coaches too. They're sitting there going, all right, we got to be sound on special teams. Oh my God, Beamer ball, let's get ready. And so the other team's very mindful of it and focused on it. So there's no element of surprise there, which is important in football. I think if you've ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, the element of surprise is obviously an important part of any type of battle. And it's certainly that book's definitely applicable to football.
So, JC, as we look ahead to the start of the second half, Gamecocks go on the road to Columbia, Missouri. And again, the Missouri Tigers and Eli Drinkwitz have been a thorn in the side of South Carolina, to say the least. You mentioned earlier in the show, take the show on the road. You'll have to do that offensively because, JC, I think right now, I don't know if it's realistic to expect South Carolina to go out there and pitch a shutout or have some great dominant defensive performance because you take on Brady Cook, Luther Burden, Theo Weiss Jr., Nathaniel Peake, Cody Schrader. Mizzou has been really good offensively this year, and defensively, I think they've been somewhat sort of so-so. I don't know if they've been as good as we expected coming in, but all in all, it'll be a tough challenge in Como this weekend. And like you mentioned, I did not know this either. 3-10 Shane Beamer is against SEC East opponents not named Vanderbilt since he started. So, it goes without saying, JC, this is a big one in Como this weekend.
Yeah, and look, it's a game the Gamecocks can win. I mean, I'm sure Missouri was sitting there last year heading into Columbia. The Gamecocks on a 4-game win streak, and they were struggling mightily. I'm sure they sat there and went, "Oh my God, now we got to go to South Carolina." And look what happened. You just got to kind of rally the troops and go in there and win you a football game. The thing I like about Missouri's defense a lot, Chris, with the exception of the LSU game, they get better as the game goes on. They're a really good fourth quarter defensive team, except for LSU, which really just ended up out talenting them at the end of the day. I watched most of that game, but yeah, they'll give up some early, and then they'll settle in. I think they're very well coached on that side of the ball, and they have players. Offensively, Brady Cook is in a zone. You got to kind of hope he has a bad day. And he hasn't had one very many this year at all. Went from being booed on his home field to being like, one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. He can hurt you with his feet. You mentioned Cody Schrader. This is a battle of former Division II running backs. Cody Schrader was at Truman State prior to last year and came to Missouri as a walk-on. And he's good, tough to stop. And then they may have the best receiving core, I think, one of them in the SEC at least. And so it's going to be tough. The Gamecocks have not fared well against Eli Drinkwitz since the 2017 opener when they beat NC State and he was the coordinator there. And even that day, his offense had about 505 yards while Roper Ball only put up about 220. Exciting win, good win for the Gamecocks. But, Eli's been pretty good against Carolina. And, it's just it's a tough one. It's a tough one to sit there and think about. That said, Missouri really hadn't blown South Carolina out. Even I guess 2019 was the biggest margin. That was a 20-point game. My God, Brian McClendon, you had Ryan Helinski throw a freaking RPO on the 3, and it ends up at a 100-yard pick 6. And I mean, if you kick the field goal there, you're only down 7, and you faced adversity. 2020, Carolina comes back. It's a 17-10 against the Doty game. 2018, 2021 was inexcusable. South Carolina only managed 253 yards against one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. Coached by Steve Wilkes, by the way, who's killing it in the NFL. So what does that tell you sometimes about these NFL guys? I don't know. And then last year was just, man, Carolina just could never, even when they got some things going, they cut it to 17-10. It just it wasn't meant to be. And really, even though the defense only gave up 6 in the second half, poor performance on both sides. I think they got caught with their pants down badly by the Missouri offense in the first half. And then obviously the offensive game plan once Marshawn Lloyd went out was non-existent. So it's tough, but it hadn't been insurmountable. I don't think Missouri's 10 times more talented than the Gamecocks. I think it's probably a slight edge to them right now, given the injuries on the roster. But, I'm not going to pick it. I'm probably not picking Carolina to win this week. I'm not going to predict it. But can they win? Oh, yeah. It's the SEC in 2023, man. Just when you think one thing's going to happen, something else does. And that should give people some hope heading into the game this weekend.
And we've already seen it, JC, in Vegas. Gamecocks opened up as an 8-point underdog. That line is now down to 7.5. So at minimum, some folks out there are expecting a close ball game in Como. And again, we've seen Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. When you think they're dead, look at last year's Florida game. They come back 7 days later and do the unthinkable. So who knows? Who knows what may happen this weekend? Yeah. JC Shurburtt, inside the Gamecocks, the Big Spur. JC, appreciate you as always taking the time, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, guys.